warned and approved a 4.76% increase, so that's that small $1,600 difference is that 0.02%. Apart from that, no changes from what you saw and approved back on January 6th, so happy to take any questions from you or the public.
Okay. Anyone, any member of the public want to weigh in? Come on
Why
up. Come on up.
My name is Walter Adams, and for 50 years I have lived at 60 Indian Brook Road. And until 10 years ago, I was pretty happy to live here. Now it's getting expensive. There are two issues in my mind. Well, I don't know, I may wrap into a few more. The first thing is I would like to see the select board move the $468,000 it's going to put in the capital fund back to the reserve, and we would take it out of next year's budget. So that I don't know how much, I don't remember how much was you were going to steal from there to fund next year's budget to help reduce the impact. But given that I can't see putting another $468,000 in the capital fund as making a spittle bit of difference, I'd like to see the taxpayers get their money back by your reducing the budget, or at least using those funds to reduce the tax rate. The other concern I have is the collection of $160,000 worth of monies for the human services budget, when in fact you had to take 25 as a desperate, well, I don't want to call it desperation, as a last act you removed about $3,000 out of the library's budget. It's like, come on. You can find $150,000 for those, and you can't give the libraries what they want for money? And instead you want to build them a 20,000 square foot building, and God knows fund how much money to make a 20,000 square foot building work? Come on. There's something intrinsically wrong with all of that. And I just don't quite understand where your head is at when you did that. So there's my comments for the day. You may use them for what you wish. And best of luck. Because my suspicion is I'm the only one looking. So there it is. And Andy, nice to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Can I ask?
Yeah, any clarifying
So,
questions?
you don't want us to fund the human services thing at all? Is that what you're asking?
I didn't say that.
That's why I'm asking you.
I think 1% is too much.
Okay.
I think if I don't know what you're going to send back to the voters and ask for their reapproval. If you said, okay, we'll give you your choice of what you can't really do in a ballot, you got to go yes, no. And I suppose what you'll have to do is say, do you want to fund 1%? Yes or no, then they'll have a chance to say yes or no. The problem is the next year you won't have any unless you go for another ballot somewhere in between that gives you a new number.
Okay.
If you understand what I'm
Yep.
saying. Like, it's tough to play that game and have people decide one way or the other.
Okay.
I do think there's a very good chance that in Chittenden County, there is no other community, well, I know because I looked, there's no other community funding human services to the level that we're funding that to by far, by actually spelling out an amount of money. Even Burlington and South Burlington don't spend that money, at least not in that wording.
Okay. Thank you.
My reaction is, half of 1% is half of 1%, and it's half of what we're doing now, which I think makes far more sense. I was on the select board in 1979, and it was difficult for the select board back then to find $1,500 to give the Little League baseball people. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, there's $150,000 to spend. I mean, I understand there's certainly a need, but you have to decide, how much is too much, especially if you think somebody is going to attempt to fund what's on this piece of paper and keep funding 4.5%, 4%, 3% ongoing basis budget increases. And then I look at this potential capital fundraiser effort and think to myself, you got 8,000 square feet of office space now for the town offices. You want 20,000. How many more people is that? What does that do to our budget? Forget about paying off $80 million worth of buildings. How are we going to fund all those extra people, the janitors? The utility costs are going to go up. I don't care if they're really efficient buildings. You got 20,000 feet now, you're going to have 80,000 that you're paying utilities on. So I think I don't want to find myself in Burlington's position where they're being taxed to death. And then somebody comes up and says, oh, by the way, our sewer and water need $250 million. Good luck.
So, Mr. Adams, you will be, based on your comments, I think you'll be happy that the budget that's going to be hopefully warned. Yeah, I don't know what's
An awful echo, sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe if I back up, that's a little better. But the budget that we're hoping to approve and pass to the ballot this evening does not include the amount for the human services funding. That will be a completely separate question on the ballot.
Well, yeah, but is that going to go on forever? Or are you going to ask that it be put back in the budget? It's still there.
If the voters approve it, it will then go back into the budget because it's a voter-approved initiative.
it's like-
And will this be in?
Yeah, the
Every year?
anticipation is that each year that this is the way the human services would be proposed to be funded, is by a separate question on the ballot going forward.
So if somebody said, I think 1% is too much, they have to either vote yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments for our public hearing on the budget? Not seeing any hands online. I don't see any other hands in the room.
I make the motion, we close the hearing for the budget.
Thank you, Don. Is there a
Excuse me.
second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. All those in favor of closing the public hearing on the budget, please signify by saying aye.
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 Motion is unanimous, 5-0.
I make the motion that we open the public hearing for the capital budget and 5-year plan.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. All those in favor of opening the public hearing on the 26 capital budget and 5-year plan, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Public hearing for the fiscal year 26 capital budget and 5-year plan is now open. If there is any public comment on either of those, please raise your physical hand in the room or your virtual hand online. Okay. No public comment for the public hearing.
I can make the same comment again if you wish, but
I've got somebody
Oh.
coming on right now.
Okay. Maybe. I think so. We did just have somebody join online. So just to recap, we're currently at the public hearing for the fiscal year 26 capital budget and 5-year plan. So if you have any public input for the public hearing, that's where we're at currently.
I guess I'm going to ask, it really sounds a foolish question, but how do I explain this to the public? So we're taking, I'm a little confused as to which money is going where for what with this one. I mean, I'm going to be honest about it. I'm not sure what we're doing, so.
For the capital budget?
Yeah. So we're taking $216,000, I don't understand where these funds are going here. Though. Sorry about that, but
So there's,
I want to check the memo so that I'm not spouting. Okay, so the fiscal year 26 operating budget includes a transfer of $216,000 to put towards capital.
to put towards capital.
So transfer from operating to capital.
Okay.
That's one piece.
All right.
$250,000 of fund balance was assigned to support the capital budget.
Okay.
On top of, right?
Right, and then there are fund balance assignments of 500,000 from a prior year. I'm sorry, I have that mixed up. The 250,000 was previously designated for future tax rate reduction.
Okay.
That was repurposed into capital.
Thank you.
And then another $500,836 was approved on January 6th from fiscal year 24 year-end fund balance.
Okay.
the capital.
Now
As well as revenues from the capital tax at 487,000.
And some interest revenue.
And some interest revenue.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
those are the funding sources.
Okay.
Any more detail that I could help?
No, but that makes it. I just couldn't get. Thank
There's
you.
a number of components there.
Ethan?
Is this conversation able to tie into the one following it?
The
Because I think
one,
it's important to note that the way this is fallen out now, from how it originated to, potential increase in the capital tax, that there would be a lap over a year. If the capital tax is approved, you would have excess funding per se. You'd be taking two. But on the counter hand of that, if the capital tax fails, right now there's a shortage of 2.5% way we budgeted this year in next year's budget because of that 216,000 or the 250,000 that was removed from the operating budget.
216,000 from
No,
operating to
the
capital,
reduction
Was
no,
250.
he's right. We reduced operating transfers from 466,000 to 216,000 in this step.
So I would say, if the next discussion is the potential to raise, for ask voters if they want to raise the capital tax by 2 cents, if that passes, that would roughly cover the $250,000 that we reduced from operating. And so next year, I would anticipate that our capital funding, operating transfers would be about 216,000.
Right.
We'd have to see, but roughly that's a guess. If that capital tax vote fails, then yes, to keep our capital funding where we think it should be, we would probably be looking at adding that back in, or some amount back into operating transfers. For the sake of discussion, $250,000 I think is a good starting point.
Right. So I just wanted to bring that up because, in my opinion, and with the general, tie in with the general budget, the $250,000 should be removed, or the $216,000, excuse me, is what's left in the general budget currently, should be removed from the general budget in the case that the capital tax does increase and the reappraisal finishes out. And then if it doesn't, we have plenty of fund balance to backfill the void, which would result in roughly 2% decrease in the budget, which would be your 2 cents in your capital tax. I don't know if it's still 2%, it might be like 1.8% at this point.
Can I
But
make
that-
sure I understand? Would you mind? So it sounds like your preference would be to remove the 216,000 of transfers from the operating budget to capital, with two possible outcomes. One, the capital tax is approved by voters,
Right.
and that funds the gap there. Or we make do without the 216,000 and see if there's a year-end fund balance that we could designate funding towards.
Correct.
Is that okay? Just want to make sure I understand.
And if we remove the $216,000 transfer from operating to capital, and the capital tax increase that's proposed does not pass,
Still have reappraisal.
where does that leave us for fiscal 26?
A reassessment after reappraisal,
That won't hit until fiscal 27.
right? So you'll have 15% of the $16 million that can be dipped into, and it could be recovered.
So you're proposing that we dip into our 15% reserves, that's our emergency fund.
In the case of absolutely zero surplus next year in the budget, that would be the situation. But in the case of a surplus, you would be pretty even wash.
Hopefully.
Either way, there's nothing written in our fund balance policy that says we can't overexpend the 15%. So it wouldn't be any policy change. It would just be a vote by the board to cover.
Yeah, actually, the fund balance says that we can set aside a maximum of 15%.
Right.
So
We
I think you said go over 15%, but in this case, it would be going under the 15%
under.
reserves, right? Am I understanding?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, you could spend down to 5% if you felt risky. You know, not saying it's a good idea, but for $216,000, 15% is what, 1.5 million, roughly. So I mean, $216,000 isn't going to make or break when there's so many uncertainties. But this year it would give us 1.8%, so you'd be 2.7, 2.6. Is that right?
I'm not sure where's the one?
The increase this year, if we remove 216,000, we'd be about a 2.7% increase on the general fund budget.
I guess depending if we're keeping the health and human service element in there, right?
I mean, either way, if you remove the 216,000, you would then lower the health and human services funding even more.
Right.
So there'd be more savings.
2,160, yeah, related to that. That would go away.
I mean, there's just an idea, but I think there's a lot of moving parts. You know, not only asking for the increase in the capital tax. I have no objections to the capital budget. I think all of our equipment, you know, current buildings that we own, infrastructure, all go to the capital budget. I just think that the funding mechanism is currently out of place. And to make the transition, it's going to be hard to make a smooth transition when you're taking money from both sides and saying, well, this is to eliminate taking money from one side. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard to take money from both sides the first year and then be like, we're only going to take money from this side moving forward. And then all of a sudden you have your appraisal on top of that. So you have a third element.
Right.
But those are my thoughts.
Understanding that we're still in the public hearing, I think, Mr. Adams, come up. If you could come up to the microphone, just because we have people online, so I want to make sure that they can hear.
You can stay there if you wish. I can take the second one.
Thank you.
So, I guess I was not aware that you were contemplating increasing the capital budget reserve component by another 2%.
2 cents.
So, as well as a vote that would say, do you want to keep or get rid of the human services portion, you're actually going to ask the voters for another 2% for the capital plan.
Yes, it's 2 cents, so it would increase it from, the
Yeah, well,
proposal is to
yeah.
increase it from 3 cents to 5 cents.
Yes.
To make up for, well, not make up for, but put us in a better position to be back to where we were post or pre-separation. But also the goal is to have more transparency into how we fund capital. So instead of relying on operating transfers from operating to capital, have the capital tax fund the actual capital budget without this kind of shuffling of money between operating and capital. The other advantage of this is that if we can, I equate it to buying a new car, right? If I don't have a car payment, but I'm still putting that money away and putting that money away, eventually that will hopefully completely reduce the reliance on needing to pay interest on a new car because I have that money set aside. I've been saving for that expense. So the same philosophy holds true for capital, that if we can put this money away, we are reducing, if not hopefully eliminating much of the interest we would pay if we were to have to borrow money. But we can also put that money, as we have with operating, Dan, keep me honest here, in a higher yield account, so it then also becomes a revenue generator, as we have seen in the operating budget, where we've set aside those funds in a higher yield account, and it's, we've seen a drastic increase in the revenue from interest.
The problem is, historically, the town of Essex has taken every nickel it's received, paid the taxpayers back 25 cents on the every extra dollar that it might have raised, and kept the rest. And what you're now doing is saying, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to be more transparent about where we used to take and put that money. We're going to say to you, we need to have you directly fund an extra 2% over here to help us with the capital fund, but you're still going to end up with between $400,000 and $500,000 a year that you're going to have as extra, and I'm still concerned that then says you're going to overfund the capital budget because you can by that $300,000, and maybe as a token to the voters, you will give them back $100,000 to take the 5% budget and turn it into 4.5 as an increase. And I don't think that's remotely fair to the voters.
And we're-
Remotely. And that's been going on for 15 years. And I'm certainly not very happy, quite frankly, with where my taxes are. And unfortunately, there seem to be a bunch of very rich people in town, or they're not paying attention, and they don't seem to care, which is pretty staggering to me. Because I can see that this is really a sleight of hand to raise another 2% that's locked in to your budget. So you just say, oh, sorry, we couldn't do anything about the budget this year because we got 5%. We have to put it in capital. And we got 1% we got to give to human resources, and we got, we got to pay the janitorial on the 2,000 square foot space we have for restorative justice, and all of these other things that are going on, and there doesn't seem to be any interest in saying, we have to finally say to whoever is producing all of these wishes, sorry, that we just can't do it all, and that we're going to set a budget limit and we're going to stay there. And when I look at this project, I take one look at the police station and shake my head and say, I don't know how you're gonna, why, I don't know what you guys thought about the results of this, but I can't imagine that project will ever get funded in any form through the town of Essex.
And when you say this project, are you referring to 8090
Upper Main Street project.
Okay. Is there any money in the FY26 budget that's specifically for buildings and infrastructure for 8090?
The capital
Upper
budget,
Main.
I think we penciled in the interest revenue, which was 80 some odd $1,000 for work on that site, for future planning of that site.
And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but even with the proposed increase in capital tax, that would still leave us in a deficit in FY30, correct?
So the existing 5-year plan shows a deficit in vehicles and stormwater in fiscal year 30. We looked at, in the packet, if we want to look at that, there is information about where the revenues would be in fiscal years 27, 8, and those take into account where we expect to be after reappraisal. If my screen loads here, I can tell you a little bit more about those.
Well, I guess that, what she just said scares the heck out of me. Because after reappraisal, your income shouldn't be any different than it was before reappraisal. Isn't that the whole point?
The way the capital tax works is it's based on the value.
Oh,
of the
okay,
grand
yes,
list.
so you're
Right.
gonna, you're, the capital tax? No, it's not, it's based on your town budget.
No,
5% of the town budget, isn't it?
it's 5 cents. So it's 5 cents on the value of the home.
Oh, okay,
Right.
so by raising the grand list, you're basically going to raise that number automatically.
That number, if I may. Yeah. The capital tax would raise. Our analysis from Dan and Karen and myself, others have shown that we're not funding capital to the point that we should be. Just focusing on our vehicle replacement schedule, we're not raising enough money to replace the vehicles we have, and that's before we factor in stormwater, buildings, infrastructure, paving, all the other capital needs.
Okay.
So the
Got
idea
it.
is really taking that 2 cents, reducing the amount that's coming out of operating, that $250,000 that we've taken out of operating, and are funding through fund balance this year. Just to make that $250,000 would require a 1.54 cent increase on the capital tax. We're asking for 2 cents, or recommending 2 cents, because we do feel like we're behind on funding our future capital needs. With the reappraisal, we have a good, decent projection and estimate of what that will raise after reappraisal. It's going to be right around the amount that we think we're going to have. The small gap that's left, we think we can cover with grants and other revenue sources. If that comes out to be too much, as if we get further down the road, I don't think, I'll speak for myself and make recommendations to this select board and future select boards. I don't think we're going to be looking to fund more capital than we need. I think that if it's too much,
Well,
our
no, not
recommendation
especially
would
if you're gonna be
to
negative
lower
in
the
30,
capital tax.
if you're not negative till 31 or 32 when you do this 2 cent set, I don't have any problem with that. And I think if we're addressing capital needs as they currently exist, that may or may not have any serious money in it for this project, for Upper Main Street, other than dribs and drabs, I don't see any major problems with you're trying to get enough money so that we could not see the impact of having to buy 2 police cars buried in our budget. They'd come out of capital. They don't now, but that's beside the point.
And I would say that police cars are kind of the one exception, because we're still sharing police with Essex Junction, and
I
so we are
understand.
budgeting
I
for
got it.
police capital.
But I just remembered them being in the budget. That's why I mentioned that when I read through the budget. So, I guess, like I said, I'm amazed. Always am, always have been, always will be, that how completely different the select board's reaction to a budget is today than it was in 1979, was I was on the last time. Just amazing to me. All right, when we were told we couldn't have a capital plan, we couldn't think ahead. We weren't allowed to have any money set aside to pay for a new fire truck. It was against the rules. Yep, pretty amazing. So obviously somebody changed the rules. For the better, I will point out. Nobody needs a surprise, like a $400,000 fire truck.
That's our goal, is to not have needs that come up that all of a sudden it's reactionary. Rather, would much prefer to plan for these things proactively and thoughtfully.
So, because you're gonna be talking about this anyway, you're not really talking about it, but my question is to you, has the town ever taken any money out of its 15% reserve? Has it ever taken any money out of it for something? And if it has not, why can't that
So,
reserve
Walt,
be?
this is Andy Watts. This is Andy Watts. During there was flood events during Irene. We absolutely did, and then got that reimbursed from the federal government on those funds.
Okay.
Were you able to hear?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah. But then I would question whether
And
given.
that's really the purpose. That's really the purpose of that money is to
Yeah, I understand.
allow us
That
to
got it
make-
exactly.
yeah.
That's what I think. And I guess the question is, does that then suggest that the town is resilient enough to live with 12% instead of 15? And then eventually give back that extra 3%? Or do something with it, whatever that is, whether it be to reduce the tax rate or put it into capital to solve a short-term capital issue. All I'm saying is, just because the accountant said you got to hold 15%, doesn't mean that you really have to. You can certainly take a look at the kinds of impacts and how much money 12 and 15% is, and say, what are our real risks here? And should we, in fact, think about doing a number that isn't 15 purposely?
But sounds.
I mean, I know you love to keep it because you want the 2% interest you're going to get. But my reaction is, it's the taxpayers' money. And granted, you are getting a little interest on it at least, certainly more than you have in the past, which I appreciate. But I think the non-collection of the money is better than collecting interest on it, frankly. Let me collect the interest on my money instead of you getting my money and collecting the interest for all of us. Thank you very much. That's it. I'm done. I'm going home. I've been here long enough. Thank you very much,
Appreciate your comments.
and good luck.
Thank you. I hope you feel better.
Thank you. I believe I'm on the other side of it, so
Good.
it's just a function of how many days it's going to take, how many days I can't stay home and I have to come out for something. It was twice today. It was a pain in the butt. Thank you very much.
Have a good night. I'll call one last time for public hearing on the capital FY26 capital budget and plan. I do not see any hands, so I would entertain a motion to close the
I
public
make the
hearing.
motion, we close the public hearing on the
Thank-
capital plan.
Thank you, Dawn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. That brings us down to presentation of the fiscal year 2024 financial audit.
Hello,
Good
everyone.
evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. My annual visit. Let me just start right in. All right. I'm also battling a little cold, so
Poor Dan. You're
tis the season. I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Bill Kaiser. I'm the shareholder at Cattell Brannigan and Sargent, in charge of the town at Essex audit. That's been the case for the last few years, but this year I'm actually the partner on the job. Greg Sargent since retired, so I've now taken on that lead role. We were on site for the town audit early October, which is on schedule with prior years, maybe even a little bit earlier, which is a good thing, never a bad thing to be earlier. And for the 2024 audit, we did issue an unmodified clean opinion, which again is consistent with previous years.
One thing you'll notice in the financial statements, which we finalized last week, so I believe in the packets you have a final copy, is in 2024 the town had a single audit due to the ARPA funds that were received in 21, 22, and a few different tranche payments from the state of Vermont. Those funds were used to purchase the land that we were just discussing at 8990 Main Street. I believe that's the address.
80 and 90.
80 and 90. But during our audit testing for the single audit, we noted no internal control issues, no compliance issues in relation to the spending of the funds, and overall no issues in that testing. I did want to point out in the reports for the single audit in the back, it does make a comment that the town of Essex is not a low risk auditee. There's a difference between high risk and low risk, and we always the accounting standards say low risk, so we're not putting the words high risk in there. It just means that you haven't had a single audit in the last 2 years, so we have to test 40% of the expenditures incurred versus 20% of the expenditures incurred as if you were low risk. Obviously, you've got in excess of $3 million and one payment for $3 million, so it did not change our scope of testing at all. We still just tested that one land purchase, noting no issues. As far as audit adjustments go, pretty consistent with previous years. We get a trial balance in early September from Dan and Jess, and as we start the planning or wrap up the planning for our audit, do some analytical testing and make inquiries of them, they're still getting ready for us to come. So a few journal entries are made in between the time that we get the trial balance and we start field work. Those are the majority of the journal entries that we posted during the year, during our audit field work for 2024. We didn't have any material alarming journal entries that the council should be aware of. I think overall, the financial statements and the budget actuals that are presented throughout the course of the year and presented to Greg or the board are pretty fairly stated compared to what you're seeing in the audit reports today. And also, I would like to point out this was I think it was the first full year, obviously not Dan's first full year, but the finance department didn't have any turnover this year. Jess had her first full year with fiscal year 2024. It's a pleasure to work with the two of them. Overall, very responsive for a very responsive client. And Greg has always made himself available as well during audit field work to sit down and meet. So overall, it's a very nice client to work with for KBS. Getting into the financial statements, I'd like to start with the MD&A, which is the management discussion and analysis. Really, that's because the governmental financial statements are on a single year basis. The MD&A gives the reader of the financial statements a true glimpse of what happened year over year, historical context, as well as future expectations. I think there's some verbiage in here about the land purchase and the future capital project on that site, as well as other projects in both the Water Sewer Fund, Recreation Programs Fund, and the general fund, along with capital projects. Then we move into the government-wide financial statements. These are most reported on as if they were a business on a full accrual basis financial statement. You'll notice that the town still has significant cash balances. I think similar to last year, that's very important to point out, just because this is the first really full year of true separation from the city of Essex Junction. The town is no longer holding on their balance sheet those cash accounts, and you've been able to maintain a pretty strong financial position as far as cash on hand goes, with all those funds being paid back. You'll also note, if you compare the financial statements year over year, there's always been a large payable back to the city. All of those payables have been relieved. This year in the financial statements, there are small amounts due to and from, but they're really just a true up of the shared service agreements as of year end that have been settled. since year end, reconciled back and forth by Jess at the city and Dan here. The net investment in capital assets are really the equity that the city, or the town, sorry, has invested in its infrastructure, net of depreciation and debt. That number for all funds is $32 million. And then the restricted funds are made up mostly of the state reappraisal monies of about $775,000, and then a police department donation, as well as the opioid fund settlements for another $80,000, making up that total. Moving on to the fund financial statements. These are more based on the modified accrual approach of accounting, and they're similar to a cash basis, and the general fund provides a very accurate picture, really, of the budget that is voted each year, and a short-term view of what the financial resources available to the town are. Overall, the activity in the general fund for the year ended June 30, 2024, resulted in a decrease of fund balance of $330,000. That's compared to the $615,000 deficit that was budgeted for as part of the 2023 fund balance assignments. Accounts receivable in the town are mainly made up of grant receivables and delinquent property taxes. The delinquent property tax receivables are net with $191,000 60-day reserve. This is a requirement in governmental accounting where any taxes not collected in the general fund in the first 60 days of the new fiscal year have to be reserved. That number, it's just solely due to collections in those 60 days, and it was $170,000, so it's $21,000 up. Again, nothing necessarily to be alarmed of. It's just based on those cash collections within that period. The town does also have an allowance for doubtful accounts of $86,500, which is steady with the 2023 financial statement allowance for doubtful accounts. In theory, the allowance typically wouldn't need to be tapped into, although it is conservative to have the allowance on the books anyway, due to the town having the ability to put a tax sale on a property. In theory, you wouldn't ever expect to have to write off a delinquent tax balance. And the town did revise the tax sale policy during fiscal year 2024, so that has been accounted for as well. The town has a fund balance policy. The unassigned balance should not be more than 15% of the 2025 budgeted expenditures, and currently the town has assigned everything in excess of this threshold, like you were discussing previously, right around that 15% threshold within the rules of the fund balance policy. The total unassigned fund balance at June 30, 2024 ended up being $2,415,963 available for unbudgeted spending. A detail of what makes up those assignments is in the financial statement footnotes on page 29. Really, the fund balance is a true picture of the surplus that's available to be used in future years, and available as a tool to help offset, obviously, future property tax increases. The one thing that correlates with that, specific to the town of Essex, is you've got these unassigned fund balance amounts, but you also actually have the cash flow to support that, which isn't always the case in a lot of municipalities. They might have the fund balance, but they don't have the cash flow. So a lot of that fund balance expenditure and what's been assigned can be invested without having to take out additional debt, if necessary. The majority of the funding available in the capital projects fund has already been assigned. There's also a detailed footnote in the same fund balance footnote of what projects have been assigned for in the capital projects fund, and it sounds like you're all aware of those projects and reserve commitments as well. Moving on, the proprietary funds are the water and sewer fund, as well as the recreation programs fund. These are business funds and meant to be self-sustaining. The water and sewer fund reported a loss of $62,000 in 2024. while there was an increase in net position of 120,000 in the recreation programs fund. These funds are similar to a regular business that you see day to day and are meant to be self-sustaining, not necessarily always taking money out of the general fund to help fund the projects within those funds. And the cash flow gives an idea of the cash funding and the fluctuations during the year from year to year operations, as well as the financing commitments for the fund, as well as the capital expenditures incurred over the course of the year that were paid for without incurring any debt. The footnotes, there were no changes in the footnotes this year, no additional footnotes, but those give a good idea of all of the debt, a detail of all the debt that the town of Essex has, as well as all the activity of the capital improvements. The retirement information is in there, as well as breakouts of accounts receivable and cash insurance policies, things of that nature. Lastly, in the required supplementary information, nothing new for this for 2024, but there is the budget to actual schedule, the comparison. One oddity in 2024 obviously is that purchase of land, so it is showing a large excess of expenditures. Down below you'll see where we reconcile in for GAAP purposes the budgeted or the unbudgeted grant revenues for ARPA. So while it looks like the general fund was overspent by about $3 million in the budget, that's really that land purchase. After that, I believe if you add that back, the budget to actual would have been fairly level funded, mainly due to the interest income that was not budgeted for, being excess revenues. That is all I have for the presentation, but I'd like to open it up to questions.
Questions from the board?
Any concerns to what you saw when you were auditing?
I really don't. It was the first year of the single audit too.
Right.
So usually with that, during the regular audit process, we always go through your internal controls, perform a walkthrough. But now with the single audit, we've got to get more into them and be more alert and aware of the internal controls. It's one of those things where we've always said, oh, cash or the AP function is city and town, and it's never been an issue where you would cross over and find a city and expense within the town. It was nice not having to worry about that risk this year. Mm-hmm. But overall, we did not have any concerns. We do issue a SAS 114 letter with the audit, and that would highlight any of those concerns. But over the course of the audit, there were no disagreements with management or any issues that we would have made you alert of before today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board questions? Kendall?
I would just ask if you could speak a little bit to the importance of maintaining a 15% fund balance.
I think it's just a good responsibility. Not only having an absurd unreserved fund balance where you're at 25% and not committing enough to offset future property tax increases or things like that, but also just maintaining that, being able to maintain that 15% level while also committing. I'm sure you'd like in some areas to assign more fund balance, but it sounds like based on today's discussion, the fund balance assignments are right where you want them, and you've got the leverage to, like on the January 6th meeting, I saw that you moved some out or moved some areas around without tapping in and reducing that 15% down to 10. For example, the city has a similar policy, and they're still trying to build theirs back up to get to 15%. So there's nothing wrong with being under 15%. But I think since the town has enacted that 15% policy, it's been able to maintain that while also not having an issue coming up with the assigned fund balance dollars that it has.
Great. Thank you.
So it does overall speak health to the town, I think.
So it is good fiscal management.
I think it's good fiscal management, and like I said earlier, the fact that the town has excess cash flow in excess of that unassigned fund balance and the assigned fund balance figure, that's also a promising sign.
Okay. Thank you.
You never know what's coming down the road.
Exactly.
Ethan?
What is the percentage with the? I know it's assigned, but what is the percentage with the cash on hand? What are we roughly keeping in our account? 25% of our
the
fund balance. Yeah,
What is that?
30%.
Because right now in the general fund alone, there is
3 million?
7 million.
7 million
7 million. So
Amount
you're
of
over
loan under.
100% of that total amount. That total.
with the cash on hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And days cash on hand is 50% of the year.
Right.
If you consider, or almost 50% of the year, if you consider just that budgeted of $16.1 million of budgeted expenditures in the general fund. So
So a significant amount.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it was Andy talking about Hurricane Irene, and all of a sudden that comes through. God forbid there's ever a FEMA event. We've got a lot of electric utilities and stuff that have $1 to $2 million, for example, invested in these storms, and FEMA still hasn't reimbursed them from 2022 and 2023. So that cash on hand is it's a lot cheaper than going for a line of credit just to fund some type of emergency declaration like that. And that's just an example. I'm not by any means saying that's on the horizon, I hope.
Well, we had 2 in the last 2 years, so
The FEMA,
hopefully we're done
well,
for a while.
Exactly, yeah.
But-
Throughout the state, there's been a little increase summer and winter.
Andy, any questions from you? I just want to be conscious that you are with us.
Been through this many times, and I'm happy.
No questions at
I
this
think I heard
time?
it's okay.
Okay. Other board questions? If not, I'm going to open it up to public comment. Is there any public comment on the fiscal 24 audit? I don't see any online, and there's nobody else in the room. So thank you very much for your time
Yes.
and the work, and it's good to hear some good news.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank
good luck
you.
with the budget session and town meeting day. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. With that, moving along to business item 7B, consider approval of fiscal year 26 Green Mountain Transit Special Assessment. Do we have anybody joining us, or just an internal?
Just
Discussion.
internal, you working on this one? You want to give
Sure. So as when Clayton from Green Mountain Transit came to visit, he described what the special assessment is for. It's a requirement that all legislative bodies of members vote unanimously to support the special assessment for it to move forward. So we pulled it out of the general fund budget where it was not a unanimous vote in support, and we've put this item in front of you, which is, so the special assessment totals $308,000 for all the member communities. The share for the town of Essex is $4,098. And this is already included in the operating budget that we've reviewed tonight. So they won't spend this money unless they believe it's necessary to do so, which we heard from Clayton when he was here. And I'll stop there in case there's other questions.
Board questions or clarifications?
This says it is going to support driver buyouts. The reason we lost our bus service was they didn't have enough drivers to run the buses. I'm a little confused. Why are you buying out drivers if you really need to keep them on the routes?
What I understand from Clayton's presentation is that because they are making service reductions, they no longer need the bus drivers. And because they are all compensated at the same rate, there isn't a seniority plan to follow.
Yeah.
And the idea to add to that is that rather than, if they have buyouts, they can then advertise and hire part-time drivers is their goal, who then are not collecting benefits and that cost. How successful it will be is a good question.
Kendall?
So this is specific for the next budget year, which we have to pay our assessment this next budget year, whether we withdraw from them or not, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That was my question.
And this, if I can add one more thing about the special assessment, the special assessment has to be approved by all member municipalities. That's in the memo, but I just wanted to highlight that. You checked recently, and everyone who has taken it up so far has approved it.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how many, if that's everybody or not, but so
Yeah.
far it has gotten support in other communities.
Ethan, you had your hand up.
I was just gonna say that we didn't have to pay this one, but Greg covered that.
Any final questions or comments, or? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve the special payment for GMT special assessment for fiscal year 26.
Thank you. Kendall, is there a second?
I'll second the vote.
Thank you.
Point of discussion. The unanimous approval, that's just all of the boards as one, not each board unanimously, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So if there are 5 or 6? Or is it more than that? So say there's 6 municipalities,
They just all have to.
6, all of the 6 select boards, councils, whatever their legislative body, they would have to vote all in favor. They wouldn't have to all vote unanimously,
Okay.
but overall, they would all have to approve. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Kendall, Ethan, are you ready for the question? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay.
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 Andy, what say you?
He muted himself.
We're not able to hear you. You're breaking up. Andy, can you try coming off mute and trying again?
Can we text for votes?
Yeah, he's saying he is unable to unmute himself. And I
Let's see if
can't-
we can do that.
I can ask him to unmute, but I can't force him. Which is probably a good thing. Generally.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I cannot unmute.
Andy, you look unmuted.
Yeah, the little red thing disappeared.
Yeah.
Call back.
We lost him.
He must have heard you.
Would you accept a text message if I text him, yay or nay? I don't know how it does for open meeting laws. But
I
he's-
don't know about the
Okay.
legality of
So do
that.
you want your text message records for public scrutiny?
The one from Andy to this meeting for that question? Sure.
That is an interesting question, though, because we do allow for remote attendance and remote voting.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is not publicly attesting to how they're voting,
I can try to call him and just put him on speakerphone.
oh, he's back.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hear you better now.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay, sorry. I disconnected and reconnected. I was trying out over and over and over again to Did I miss the vote?
We were waiting to see if you were going to come back. Were you a yay or a nay?
Yay.
Okay.
Aye. Yes.
So motion carries 3-2. And since this was not unanimous, we need to go to a roll call. Don?
No.
Ethan?
No.
Kendall?
A.
I vote yay. Andy, you go ahead.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
3-2, motion carries. With that, we are on to 7C, consider approval of fiscal year 2026 municipal budget. So we've been discussing since November. We've had public comment. We've had a public hearing. So we're bringing this back to the board for our kind of final go-round.
So is the amount to be recommended 16,365,963?
I'm seeing a nod from Dan,
Yes? That's, okay.
and that's absent the human services funding. Okay.
All right, then I make the motion that the select board adopt the fiscal year 2026 municipal budget in the amount of $16,365,963.
Okay, motion has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Andy. I have a feeling that there's going to be discussion on that motion. So we'll open it up for some discussion.
I just have a quick question for Dan. Do we have the number ironed out for the difference between the part-time position and the full-time position for the economic development?
I don't have that number.
We don't have that figured out yet.
For community development,
For community development. Sorry.
the difference is largely going to be in the benefits, and we don't know that number.
So how are we budgeting for that number?
We budgeted for the maximum amount that person, the current position, is eligible for.
Okay, so do we know what that number is?
That was 36,000 for full benefits. Yeah,
I think that was the number, yeah.
And then there's on top of that there'd be a smaller amount for VEMRs, health, dental, vision, stuff like that. Probably about 40,000 total.
Okay, so my proposal would be to lower the budget by $256,000 to remove the $216,000 transfers from budget to operating budget to capital, and then remain at the part-time position for the community development. But that's where I'm at with it, because I think it's important to note that there's 186,000. I might be off on that number. 176,000. I think it's $186,000 in the capital fund currently for 8090 Upper Main Street for future buildings.
There's about 30,000 at the start of the fiscal year, and we were transferring about 80,000. So I'd say it's more like 110-ish, yeah.
I just looked at it. I'm gonna go pull that number up real quick because I was just looking at that. But that's my opinion, and if there's no support for it, then I say we cut the talking and call a vote. But if anybody has support for it,
So is that a motion to amend?
that would be my motion to amend. We'll
Okay.
lower the budget by, at minimum, the $216,000 that is gonna come from operating to capital, under the pretense of the vote. And my backing there would be that there's I gotta get to the exact amount here. It was just in front of me. It's in that chart on the capital.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a bird in the room.
Chat.
Sonar. There you go. But your motion to amend is to decrease by 246,216, of which was the transfer from operating to capital. The other 30,000 is,
The other 40,000.
40, it said, yeah.
so it's 256,000?
Yep.
Okay, apologies.
256,000 even?
Well, just as a point of clarification, I think the 40 is related to benefits, and there's also a component of salary, which is how we got to the 50,000 number when we were.
My original was 70, which makes perfect
Right.
sense when you take 40 and add 30 in the salary difference.
No, the salary alone was around 10 to 12. The 70 was total for the whole department increase, which there are other staff members who comprise that benefits number. So 50 was for that part-time position to become full-time, with I think 37 or 38 of it being benefits and 12 being salary. Are you following me there?
Yeah, so the hours currently, we're 20 something hours a week.
28,
28.
I believe.
28.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do what you will, but
So 12 hours a week is $12,000 or yeah, 12 hours a week is
Yeah, it's
$12,000 on the whole year.
a year, yeah.
And the increase in that line item of the 40,000 was just the raises this year.
The 40,000 is the family plan.
No,
which is-
in the line item in the general budget for salaries under community development, there was $40,000 increase.
Okay, so if we take the 11 or 12 out
The
And
rest
it-
was raises.
for existing staff. I don't have those numbers in
I
front of
don't
me,
have
but whatever
I
the
didn't bring my
reduction.
binder 'cause
If I can just
forgot
reference,
it.
so in community development, the 2025 budget has regular salaries of a little over 266,000 and part-time salaries of about 29,400. So combined, it's about 295,000. And the 2026 budget as proposed now is 335,000, all in regular salaries. So I think that's the 40,000 that you're speaking of in that line item, which includes more than the one person that we're talking
Yeah,
about.
it'll be 3 full-time employees at that point, right?
Yeah, I think it would be 3 full-time.
I got this all written down in my binder. I just literally didn't bring it because
Or
I didn't think
actually, it would
anybody would
be-
listen to
Maybe
me.
four.
Actually, it'd be 4.
4.
It's 4.
Now
Yeah.
4. It was 3. Okay.
It's going from 3.7 FTEs, if you will, to 4.
So the other part of that increase, Ethan, from 70 is, there's $31,000 in part-time salaries right now. That would be added to the full-time salaries line item. And so it's the normal raises, the shift of part-time salary now being reflected in full-time plus the additional hours.
Right.
So that, yeah, $30,000 is going from part-time to full-time. So that's why that $70,000 number is there. It seems a little bit higher than your normal raise.
Right, but remove the 30, you still have 40 left over, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I get you. I'm following. Yeah.
But like I said, if there's unanimous approval for the budget, go ahead. But those would be my recommendations. And the number there, it was actually in the audit. I can't believe we don't have that number readily available for how much is in that account, Dan? The municipal buildings, future municipal buildings.
So, if I'm following along in the audit,
Yeah, it was in the audit. I'm trying to get back to it, but
so municipal complex projects in the audit report, I can't tell you which page it is in the packet,
29.
but it's 38,911 at
First
the end of
year.
fiscal year 24.
Yep.
And then we're proposing moving 80,000 or so within the capital plan in 26 to add to that total.
Okay. There's a number in there. Let me grab it.
87,585.
Okay. What's the total?
So 87 and 39 is about 126.
126. Okay, that's what I saw. So that would be my counterintuitive to taking out the 216,000 is that there's potentially $126,000 that's set aside currently, proposed to be finished set aside currently, that could be repurposed for the time being.
But the municipal complex is in capital,
Right.
right? And
It is in capital, yes.
so we would have to transfer that from capital to operating?
No.
So I think this is kind of, if I can go off of what you're thinking, Ethan, eliminating all the operating transfers to capital
Right.
at the core of this, and then saying putting this $87,000 in play that's proposed within the capital project. I don't know if you want to talk about that now. I know it's all related, but I know we're talking about the operating budget too. But I think he's putting on the table not assigning that $87,000 to the municipal complex, essentially.
Okay. But in relation to the municipal budget, we're talking about a $256,000 reduction, which has eliminated the $216,000 transfer from operating to capital and deducting $40,000, which would be roughly the equivalent of the addition of benefits for what would be the
A full-time
move to
position.
full-time for community development. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion to amend? Second, call for a second. I am not hearing a second, so we're back to the original motion of approving the fiscal 26 municipal budget from Dawn, as seconded by Andy.
I think I thought Kendall had a question too.
No, I'm all set.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions? Because if not, I'm going to turn it over and see if the public has any input.
That's fine.
Any public input on the fiscal 26 municipal budget? Sorry, my brain just kind
So
of
you go with just that and not
blanked.
benefit one?
Sure.
I am not seeing anyone raising hands, so I'll bring it back to the board. Motion is to approve the fiscal year 26 municipal budget. Dawn said the amount. I don't want to misstate it for the record. That is
16,365,963.
okay. That is what I had written down. Good. So that is the question before you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay.
Yay.
Okay.
Okay. Since we are not unanimous, Dawn,
Aye.
Ethan,
Yay.
Kendall,
Nay.
Andy.
Aye.
I also vote in the affirmative, yay. So we have approved the fiscal 26 municipal budget. Moving along, consider approval of fiscal year 26 capital budget and 5-year plan. Let me pull that one up. Are there any clarifying questions, comments?
I never got an answer on my sidewalk going down from the playground to
Oh,
city,
I'm sorry.
and why there's two of them.
Hmm.
Because that's part of the 5-year plan.
Right. We did talk about this. I think it was just mislabeled?
Are you talking about the Route 15
Yeah,
sidewalk?
Right, there was two prices and two parts of it, and I couldn't understand why they wanted to run one from Maple Fields to the Cirque to the playground. Didn't make any sense. And then they're going down to, why does the name of that road just went right out of my head? Where the water break was. From there back up to the playground. It didn't make any sense as to the way they set it up or the financing of it. So, and it was part of the 5-year plan. So I was just curious.
Yep. So since that was a part of the 5-year plan and the budget is for 26, I think that was down the road farther for those two. Am I remembering that correctly?
I believe it was, but I can look.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Don. I should have.
That's okay. But I'm just saying. I thought the part of the motion is to approve the 5-year plan, isn't it, or not?
Yeah.
So, maybe not. It says one thing at the top and it says something at the bottom. So, hold on a minute here. Actually, I guess the actual amendment does not include the 5-year plan, so. That's all right. No, I don't know.
Yeah, I apologize. I do remember talking with Aaron about that, and I just cannot recall exactly what his.
Right, we had the conversation. I think it was.
Oh, yeah, that's-
I think it was just bad labeling on our part, is the short answer. But I'm not. I'd have to get back to you, Don. I'm sorry.
So the amount that's in the budget is $20,000 for the Route 15 sidewalk from the Cirque to the mini golf location. So that is in the 2.79 million. So
Go down to the
You
next
can-
line. No, I think the next one says it's the rest of it, isn't it?
there's another section of Route 15 sidewalk from Athens Drive to the Cirque that's proposed for fiscal year 27. So there's a couple things that could be done in the budget. If you don't want to support that $20,000 being reallocated, you could reduce it. And then with the 5-year plan, I think that's intended to be a preview. I don't believe that. Certainly there will be other changes just out of happenstance that will happen before that plan comes back to you again. So I don't think that there's action needed there with the $100,000 on that end if there's concern there. That's not in the 2.79 that's in front of you to put on the ballot for this year, or to approve.
Ethan?
I was just gonna ask a question of clarification that if this doesn't get approved tonight, we're gonna have to hold a special meeting. Is that correct?
No, the capital budget, you can, it's just a select board approval. It doesn't
Oh,
have to
right.
be on the ballot for warning. So you could approve this at your next meeting on February 3rd, so a week from tonight.
In that case, I make the motion that we table this until we get a little more information.
There's no motion to table.
No motion to table. I recommend.
Okay, is everybody good with that? All right, February 3rd.
Sorry, but I just, that's,
Oh, Andy, go ahead.
We're gonna delay over $20,000. That's not gonna be spent this year.
5 years includes the other part of that, Andy.
Yeah, from the Cirque to the golf course, it is in FY26. So I think that's the,
Yeah, well, my guess is that it just says it's on that side of the road, but it's actually on the other, because, but,
Yep.
yeah, I guess
Yep.
it won't hurt to wait a week.
so we'll bring that back up. We'll defer that to our February 3rd meeting. Oh my gosh, it's 2025. I almost just wrote 2024. Okay, so nothing to approve there. 7E, consider approval of town meeting ballot question proposing increase to capital tax rate. Is there anything staff wants to discuss on this, or we?
Sure, we've talked a lot about it. We talked a lot about it earlier tonight with other items, but just to recap and hit the high notes. This is a couple main drivers here. One, looking at our capital plan, capital budget, we do think we need to raise additional capital revenue to keep up with our capital needs. That's one big piece. The other big piece of it is those reductions from the operating transfers from the operating budget to capital. We've reduced that by $250,000. This is a chance to make that up. We've talked over the past couple of years about shifting our capital funding from the operating budget to the capital tax. This is a step in that direction. We do have the funding with the fund balance that's been assigned to capital at $250,000. If voters are not supportive of this approach, we do have the money to cover that gap this year if an increase fails at the ballot boxes. But it is an opportunity to see how that lands with voters and keep our capital intact. I mentioned earlier, just to make up that $250,000, we think that the capital tax rate would need to increase 1.54 cents. We are asking for more than that. That gets back to that first point I made about the need to catch up to fully fund our capital. That's the difference. There is the reappraisal coming up. Dan put together some numbers that are in the packet about what the reappraisal projections will be. We still think we're going to be a little bit short, even if with 5 cents. Karen put it in the memo. We think we can make up some of that difference through grants, through other funding opportunities, and ways to do that. So that is the staff recommendation. The 2 cents is out there. That's what we put out there for recommendation and discussion. Do really think you should strongly consider that at least 1.54 cents to make up the difference shifting out of capital. But with that, Dan and Karen have spent a lot of time on this, so I'll ask them if they have anything to add before turning it over to you.
No, I think that was a
Yeah, I
Good
think that's
summary.
pretty succinct. Yeah.
Kendall, I think I saw your hand go up before.
I've had it up, but
Yep, go ahead.
where do I start? Okay, first of all, in order to get approval for the capital tax, you really have to sell what you need for the capital tax. So when I see a memo from staff that says right in here, while there will still be a gap between needed and provided funding, staff will pursue grants and other funding sources to cover this gap to the maximum extent possible. I think we really need to narrow down what we need exactly for the capital tax and ask for that. It's not going to make a big difference if you ask the voters for 1.5 cents or 2.2 cents. They're either going to approve it or not, especially if you back it up with what we need. And you've given us information and details time and time again. You've got to fund your capital. You're not going to not replace the grader, not replace the truck, not repair a building. You get a $2 return on every dollar that you put in the capital. So I just want to see, what do we need to have for a final capital tax number, and ask for that versus just asking for 2 more cents or coming back and asking for a half a penny or whatever. What do we need? And I know there's a little bit of a gap there, but I'd rather see that there's a little bit of gap that is a little bit more than what we need versus what we're not getting what we need. So that's my 2 cents.
Is it 2 cents or 2.2 cents?
2.2 cents.
Sorry, I was just hanging out there. Ethan.
I make the motion that the town of Essex increase the capital reserve fund by adding 2 cents to tax rate in addition to the 3 cents previously authorized for the purpose of financing capital projects and equipment.
Thank you. Ethan, is there a second? Dawn, was that a?
No, I'm thinking about what Kendall said.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I read
Andy
the
said something.
wrong recommendation too. So
Andy, I'm sorry, did you?
recite all of what I said. I'll start over.
You're right.
What?
I read the totally wrong. I read the question, not the recommendation.
Does that still work?
I think the only addition I would suggest is to put that question on the ballot.
On the 2025 town meeting day ballot.
Yes.
Okay. So increase from 3 to 5 and put it on the ballot.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the important part.
Yeah. Yes. Is there a second? Okay, thank you. Ethan, thank you. Andy, I got your second. Are there any further questions?
There's no willingness to have a friendly amendment to that, for that to be 2.2 cents.
That would be a question for Ethan.
No. I only made the motion so I can vote it down because we left $216,000 in the general budget, and with your shortfall that's proposed here, my bold prediction is that you're going to see a capital transfer next year out of the general fund budget, which just defeats the whole purpose of raising this with the appraisal. So until it's clearly divided, I can't see any capital tax increase.
Fair enough.
Or until it's actually presented the way you wanted it, so the town voters know what we need.
Yeah.
There's $216,000 in capital transfers in this approved budget that just got approved. and you're asking for 2 more cents on every $1,000 of mine and everybody else in this town.
Yeah, I would just note that I started this discussion months ago about removing all the operating transfers to capital and funding the capital tax for what it needs to be funded at. So we're getting closer. So
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. I am realizing that we did not have public comment on this, so I will open this up to public comment, increasing the capital tax from 3 cents to 5 cents. Okay, bringing it back to the board. Are you ready for the question?
Recording in progress.
Sorry. Glad you're here.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
No. Nay.
Okay, we need a roll call. Dawn?
Nay. No. Whatever I'm supposed to. No.
No?
Yes.
Okay, Ethan?
Nay.
Kendall?
Aye.
Andy? Is that an aye?
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that was a yes. I vote yes. Motion carries 3-2. We have a question for the town meeting ballot. We can let the voters indicate their pleasure. Item 7F, consider approval to place human services funding question on town meeting ballot and update the human services funding distribution policy. Apologies, I'm just getting back to the memo.
So my question then is, because at one time this was voted from the floor of town meeting to do this, why are we now making it a ballot item?
Many years ago, in the 1980s,
I was there. Thank you very much.
I think it was 1986 or 87 to be exact. There was a vote from the floor of town meeting to have Essex contribute 1% of its budget to human service
Yes.
agencies. Since that happened and it was approved, that question and that amount has always just been rolled into the operating budget. So each year thereafter, there was a line item in the operating budget in the general fund allocating 1% to human services. I think it was about a year or two, Kendall asked the question, noticing some other towns around the state were voting on that separately. Tammy and others worked with our town attorney to understand if we were doing it properly or if we should be shifting to the separate question. The short answer is that we weren't necessarily doing it wrong, but the cleaner and definitely better way to do it is to vote on it separately. It's a bit of a gray area. Could keep doing it the way we've been doing it, but the legal guidance and recommendation from staff is to just end any question of it going forward that the human services funding be a separate question on the ballot. And it would be a question each year.
So it'd be
on the ballot.
every year you're going to do
That would
this
be
and
the
not.
intent. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Are there any questions, comments from the board? Kendall?
I would just note that this doesn't really address some of the concerns that have brought it to other towns, in that included in all of those human services contributions that go out, there might be a question as to whether the select board actually has the authority to spend taxpayer money to that. And there's also a question as to whether a majority of residents would support specific requests made by some of the different social service organizations. So I just still have that concern about the way that this is worded for the ballot.
Ethan?
Just talking here, but you know, the only good side of that is that if there is enough of an issue with certain, and it gets voted down, you know, then it comes back to the select board, and we decide how do we get a human service fund approved. What is the percentage? What is the, you know, something that's never been done before? I'm not saying it's not gonna pass or it is gonna pass. I'm just saying that there is that opportunity for something. If there was an issue, you know, it could be voted down and brought back to the select board as a singular item. I kind of like the idea, personally, to vote on the whole thing separately. But I think it's going to be challenging if what is, you know, what is the path forward when it gets voted down, if it gets voted down.
Would anyone care to make a motion on this item?
Make the motion that the select board place an article on the town meeting ballot to ask voters if they wish to appropriate 1% of the general fund budget as passed by voters to the Human Services Contributions Fund.
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Don. Okay. Are you ready for the question?
Did you want to open it up to?
Is there any public comment on the Human Services funding ballot item? Bringing it back to the board. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Andy, was that an aye? Okay. All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay. Since it's not unanimous, Don,
Yes.
Ethan,
Aye.
Kendall,
Nay.
Andy, yes. Yep. Andy is an aye. I am also an aye. Motion carries 4-1. I will note that we also have an item to recommend the select board approve the changes to the current human services funding distribution policy that was not included in that motion. So I would entertain a motion for that item as well.
Sorry, I did not see that.
Yeah, I
Hold on.
didn't.
Yeah, I was trying to decide whether to interrupt your motion.
I'll make the motion that the select board approve the changes to the current human services funding distribution policy to align with this change.
Thank you, Ethan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Don. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay. Don,
Yes.
Ethan,
Aye.
Kendall,
Nay.
Andy. I am also an aye, so the policy motion also carries 4-1. Brings us to the end of 7F. Next item 7G, consider approval of warnings for the 2025 town meeting and informational hearing.
So moved. Make the
Second.
motion. I have to hold on. I make the motion the select board approve and sign the warnings to the 2025 town meeting and warn an informational hearing to receive comments on all questions on the 2025 ballot to be held on March 3rd, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. at the Essex Middle School.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. So is there any comment on those? Is there any public comment on warning the ballot and the informational hearing and town meeting?
I have a question on that February 24th thing.
February 24th thing.
It says at 6:30, town offices during the regular. Is that just like another hearing type?
We did it last year. It's kind of just it's a dry run almost for the informational hearing, but it's also a chance for people to come out now that we're mailing ballots and people maybe voting early. It's just a chance to interact with people, get the word out, spread information, and answer questions sooner. So it's sort of a informal, unofficial, informational town hearing.
Are you still doing a presentation on CCTV or whatever it was you did?
Wednesday.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Good thing
Oh,
you asked.
Tuesday. Tomorrow.
Oh, what time? So we can watch.
6-ish, Just after 6?
Six.
All right, Karen,
So
you have
five?
to have your meeting done before 6 tomorrow night so we can get home and watch.
Okay.
6:10.
10?
6:10 p.m.
Okay.
What?
And Dan has drafted
We're
the
meeting on-
PowerPoint, which I'm
Yeah, I know that. 4:30 to 5:30.
Okay.
Yeah, can you
What's
send
that
me
say?
All right, thanks.
The budget hearing on CCTV.
Okay, so back to the motion.
Sorry.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Right.
All those. Andy is an aye. All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Dawn,
Yes.
Ethan,
Yes.
Kendall,
Nay.
Andy.
Yes.
I am also a yes. Motion carries 4-1. Next item, discussion and potential action about municipal ethics requirements by the state, including appointment to ethics liaison officer. Does anyone want to, thank you, Dan. Does anyone want to tee this one up?
I'll give a brief overview. The state has passed Act 171. It took effect on June of last year, and in short, it lays out a lot of ethics policies and guidance for municipalities. There's a lot in there. There's going to be a lot to unpack over the coming months, everything from receiving training for all of you, some of our boards, some of our staff. Some of the steps that we need to take in the short term are appointing a liaison to the, an ethics liaison to the State Ethics Committee, and I have recommended that that person become Karen. She's an ethical person. I think she'll be a good job of it. And part of the reason it's not me as the manager is if there's an issue that comes up with staff and it has to go through a disciplinary process, the manager kind of has the final say. And then you guys potentially have really the final say. But it leaves that step to come to the manager if need be. So that's why we're recommending the deputy manager be appointed as the state ethics liaison. Also the designated complaint recipient. So if we do have any complaints, those would go to Karen to start at least. Those are the two big things for tonight. I mentioned the training that we'll have to do by September 30th. We're going to have to pass an ordinance as well. There's not quite as much of a time crunch for that. I believe these two designations have to be made by the end of this month, I think it is, which
Yes.
is why they're here before you tonight. So, anything to add to that?
No, other than there's a model ordinance that's from Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It's specific to investigating claims and that process, and so that is will complement the town's existing ethics and conflict of interest policies, and we'll come back to you with more information about where the overlaps exist or where there's gaps.
Are you willing to accept this appointment?
I am. Thank you for asking.
Then I make the motion that the select board designate Deputy Manager Karen Adams as the Ethics Liaison Officer for the Town of Essex to serve as the point of contact for communications with the Vermont Ethics Commission, receive ethics complaints, and track the completion of municipal ethics training.
Thank you. Dawn, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. Any discussion? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda, consider approval of town manager's appointment of Charles Tabone to the Cemetery Commission. This is flagged for executive session. Should we want to go into executive? Or if someone would like to make a motion?
As
I would
someone
make a
that
motion.
has worked with Charlie on the Charter Committee, I highly recommend his appointment to the Cemetery Commission.
Is that a motion?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Dawn, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I heard you, Andy. Motion carries 5-0. Our next item is,
Thank you, Charles.
yeah, thank you, Charlie. Our next item is for executive, which brings us to the reading file. Any board member comments? Kendall?
Kudos to Dan. He read his investment update and his financial updates. he's obviously on the ball and doing a fantastic job. And if there's a bonus there, I'd give him a good bonus. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's good to see those updates regularly in the packet. So kudos to Dan.
We'll happily
Echo
pass that
that.
on. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
Oh, I've lost. Thank you to Rebecca, and I've lost her last name for her service on the Economic Development Committee.
Rebecca
Robbins.
Robinson.
Thank you, Robinson. Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck to you. The other item, we did discuss this at the beginning of the meeting, the Essex Farmers Market item was empty. There was nothing in the packet. It will be in the next packet. But essentially, Essex Parks and Rec will run a farmers market on Wednesdays, 3:30 to 6:30 at Sand Hill Park, starting in May 2025. So the full memo will be in our next packet. Good news. I'm excited about that.
I think that's great.
Kendall?
I would just add to that and say great job by Adrian to do that, and maybe she could do the same thing with the community gardens, because that really shows you the support for it. So.
And that does bring us to the end of our agenda. So I would entertain a motion for...
Madam Chair, I make the motion that the Select Board enter executive session to discuss the negotiating and securing of real estate purchase or lease options in accordance with 1 VSA Section 313A2 and to include the town manager and deputy town manager.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ethan. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Andy, are you a yay or a nay for executive? I heard an aye. Thank you. Motion carries 5-0. We are now in executive. Are we coming back out or are we okay? We will adjourn after exiting executive session. No action, but
Andy, I will try to call your cell phone.